meeting shall be called to order. This meeting has been posted in compliance with the open meeting law. If all the members are present, so a quorum is present and all members are present. So, with that, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thanks. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. Members of the public may participate in the meeting without being physically present by one of the following methods. Written comments may be submitted via the public comment form, or to comment during the meeting, members of the public may call 702-589-9629. The public comment is now open. Okay, hearing no public comment, then we will move forward with the meeting. Item number 1, for possible action, approval of the minutes of the April 27th, 2022 meeting.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as printed.
Second. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carried. Minutes will be placed on file. Moving on to possible action number 2, discussion with Northwind Resource Consulting, LLC, on potential changes to the adopted exterior design guidelines for various properties in the historic district.
Good evening, committee. I do have a presentation. Oh, good. Okay, no tricks this time, I promise. Okay. We can go to the next, apologize. There we go. Okay, so this presentation is a follow-up to our last presentation to this committee in March of this year. It was established during that meeting that contributing properties constructed within the period of significance, which is 1931 to 1945, would follow the adopted design guidelines for rehabilitation and construction, and new infill construction would be reviewed using the design within context approach. So we're shifting slightly in our recommendations to include all non-contributing properties that are built within and outside the period of significance. So if outside, it's starting from 1946 and up to 50 years old, be evaluated using the design within context approach. And it's important to note that some of the direction that we're proposing for discussion tonight was taken from the recent camp training provided by the National Alliance for Preservation Commissions that was attended by some of the committee members this past Saturday. The draft ordinance does not, it does include language about new construction, alterations to non-contributing resources, and infill. However, this approach, it would require a new section that would discuss how new construction and infill would be treated. So, and it's key that the review process be codified in the updated ordinance. The camp had a nice kind of simple way of breaking down the design review process. And I've included it here on this slide. So essentially, the applicant would submit a completed certificate of appropriateness application. Staff would review that for completeness, and they may schedule a pre-application conference. And again, this is really simplified, but staff would review routine maintenance and minor work, and the committee would review large rehabilitation projects, new construction, infill, demolition, and anything else that might be specified in the ordinance as being more major work. I think it's good to kind of have a quick refresher on the design within context approach that would be used by city staff and the committee to evaluate infill and alterations to non-contributing properties, and after which I'll provide specific examples. So this approach is essentially based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, but it can be modified for use by this committee, based on the type of resources that are in Boulder City in the historic district. The Secretary of Interior standards, they kind of, they require that work proposed for non-contributing properties be reviewed for compatibility within a well-defined context. With this approach, historic materials shouldn't be damaged by new construction or alterations. New work should be differentiated from the old, and work should not adversely affect the character-defining features of the overall historic district and the property itself, and this one applies to new infill construction as well. It focuses on a more broad experiential level rather than literally copying the features of adjacent historic buildings. And so the larger design aspects of the project, such as placement on the lot, orientation on the lot, setback, scale, mass, rhythm, and form, that carries more importance than more specific design aspects. And the context would need to be clearly identified for the different areas of the district. So on the bottom right is the map that I showed in March, and it has the kind of different areas of the district that might have their own contextual element. And as I mentioned before, this map isn't perfect. It requires a lot more work, but it's just a basic visual example of commercial and public, different residential areas, and more industrial uses for which, these design contexts would need to be developed. And in addition to maps, illustrations like the one on the top right from the city of Denver, it can be used to demonstrate an area's contextual elements. The blue building is demonstrating new infill and how it conforms to the existing building height. Other architectural elements like window height, porch height, massing, setback, etc. So these types of illustrations are really helpful to applicants and staff and committee members when you're planning for projects and conducting reviews. And they don't have to be this technical. Photographs and aerials, simple sketches, those are all viable options. So now I will walk through some of the examples. For new residential infill within the historic district, I've used Birch Street as an example. The contextual elements for infill construction along Birch would be one story, a U or L-shaped plan with an inset porch facing the street. The entrance is within the porch, and you would have a hipped and a gabled roof. So some additional, more specific requirements might be at least one set of paired or tripled or a ribbon of windows. Streetscape elements would include setback, maintenance of the parkway, etc. So for some, the placement, the number and type of windows and doors as well as materials might be less important. So, these specific contextual elements would apply to the buildings within this area of the district. So these would not apply to, the areas, little national folk, houses, or even those houses that are, even though the map shows them lumped together, even those houses that are on Denver are different than this house. So you'd have to define these very, different contextual elements per areas. And so the sketch on the right shows the contextual elements in a kind of stripped down form. And this type of sketch or graphic is often used in design guidelines because it's a good way to isolate the most important contextual elements without a lot of distraction. for new commercial infill, but actually, before I go forward, do any of you have questions about the residential infill? So just to clarify, this type of sketch is something that, let's say, a house is demolished for whatever reason, it burns down or whatever, and somebody wants to build a house there. They would look at a sketch like this or something similar for that area, and these key contextual elements would be identified, and they would need to build a home that met those contextual elements, but it doesn't necessarily have to be stucco or brick, or have a sash window or whatever. So that's the kind of thing, and as we move forward with this, we'll work on some of those details, but does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Is there any questions about that? Okay. So commercial, on the left is an image of the 500 block of the west side of Nevada Way, and it shows mostly original buildings with the canopies, stucco finish and parapets. For new commercial buildings within the district, the main contextual elements might be some of those that are listed in the contributing design elements that are in the chart 4, downtown commercial buildings, such as the sidewalk shading canopies, arcades, porticos and awnings, divided light windows and parapet walls. It may be, in this case, important to require a build-to line at the back of sidewalk and a stucco concrete panel or other flat type of finish. And so for this example, I used 1400 Wyoming, again on the right. It was constructed in 2001. It's clearly contextual with its surrounding fabric, with its arcaded canopy that extends over the sidewalk and the flat roof and the parapet wall. And even though it has a second story, it's set back enough so that it's not really visually obtrusive. So again, a new section in the design guidelines regarding new construction for commercial and residential would be needed. So we'll now take a look at alterations to non-contributing residential properties constructed within the period of significance. So these are those that, they've had some alterations, which made them non-contributing. The photo in the top left is the home in 2020 as photographed during Northwind survey. The aerial photo is from Google Maps 2022. The photo in the top right is from the 1983 Janus survey, where you can see where it had a different siding and it had the original porch massing. And the sketches just from original building of this type. Northwind recommended this property as not contributing because of the addition on the left side, which is outlined in red on the image and in the aerial. It formed a flush front facade, and they also infilled the original screen porch. The front entrance was relocated, and the original screen door, the front entrance was relocated to where the original screen door probably was, and a small porch with that little shed roof was built over the entry. The original wood frame windows were replaced with vinyl sliding windows, and the exterior walls were sheathed in a kind of a rough stucco. So you can see a comparison of this building's footprint with its neighbor to the west in the aerial shot. This one is the one that has the porch outlined in blue, or shaded in blue. That's what the original massing of the porch would look like. So let's say, for example, the property owner wanted to restore that massing to the front facade. They want to remove the addition and the small porch, and they want to install additional windows. So a design within context approach would not require the property owner to restore the infilled screen porch back to its original use and its original appearance, but it would encourage the correct dimensions of the screen porch be maintained in order to keep that asymmetrical facade. And that might include reconstructing the original hipped roof where the porch is wrapped around the house. And you can kind of see, depending upon a budget and how much will there is, it would also require kind of, a massive modification to that far side of the roof. So that might not happen. However, that's the kind of thing that a design within context approach would encourage. It would also perhaps encourage, a ribbon of identical windows on where the screen porch was. to kind of mimic the rhythm of the screens, and that all of the windows on the facade match instead of having different sizes and types of windows. And maintaining the location of the entrance where it is now is probably good. That's probably where the original screen porch was. So again, a specific type of window might not be important, but it's, the key is to encourage compatible alterations, but not create this false sense of history. Non-contributing commercial properties constructed within the period of significance, kind of the same thing. So we're looking at 554 Nevada Way, which was constructed in 1936 in a minimal traditional style. And this building was determined non-contributing in 2020 because the original windows were removed and the front entrance was relocated. So the current commercial design guidelines includes, contributing design elements that would not strictly apply to this building, the arcades and the sidewalk shaded canopies and stuff like that, sculpted and detailed parapet caps. So here is where, this design within context approach reviews alterations within the context of the appropriate style, the original style of the building, and the remaining existing historic elements of the building. And this is a good way to, it's just more appropriate than strict design guidelines for examples such as this. So if the property owner wanted to add windows and relocate doors, this approach would recommend installing windows that respected the same, size and location of the original windows, maybe moving the entrance door to its original location, and again, type of windows, type of windows and doors, and even the exact type of the materials of the windows and doors are less important. And of course, if they wanted to do something to the roof, it would not encourage a parapet wall. Probably goes without saying, but. So, alterations to commercial properties constructed from 1946 up to 50 years old. These types of, so properties that are built outside of the period of significance, you really have to look at the building itself and not as much about the character defining features of the district. So with this particular building, you wouldn't, if the owner wished to remove the mansard roof, say, and install an arcaded canopy with a shed style roof, which is what's found on Nevada Way, that would not be encouraged by the design within canopy approach, because the building was constructed in the 40s, and the flat canopy and the ribbon windows are design elements that are strongly associated with this time period. So the angled, entrance and corresponding parapet, as seen on the 1983 photograph on the right, are also indicative of 1940s commercial buildings constructed on an urban corner. So you'd want to maintain those elements from, that convey the age and existing historic elements of the building. And same with residential. This is one that was built on 5th Street in 1956, and I think it's fairly obvious you wouldn't want to apply the same design guidelines as for those constructed within the period of significance to this home. So you would really want to evaluate those changes within the context of the international style, with the flat roof, with wide overhanging eaves, the asymmetrical facade with sort of, undulating planes, large picture windows, and other mid-century architectural elements, such as those angled eave supports and things like that, details. So that's, I hope that gives you a good idea of how that approach would be implemented. And it's really for those buildings that are non-contributing. You just want to kind of keep what's there as much as you can, and hopefully, especially with the grant program, restore some of those elements in a way that is compatible and doesn't harm any more of the architectural history of the building itself or the neighborhood. And so this is a good way to evaluate those within their specific contexts. Yes.
For those last couple of examples, when they're outside the period of significance, would there even be one of those little sketches with the key points? Or are you saying, basically, you would just look at whatever historic photo we have for that building, and the idea would be that whatever is proposed should be as close to that as possible?
Yeah, for individual, we haven't decided exactly how we're going to do that one yet. We've got to put our heads together and think about that. We are doing the design guidelines for styles, and we're running into the same kind of issue where there might be one building that's one style. But I think that calling out those elements, even if it's just one building, is helpful. So there are a couple of international styles, so that'll be lumped together. I can't recall the one that there is just one building. But what we're going to have to do now is, for those that are, because we've sort of shifted direction, for those that are outside of the period of significance, we're going to have to look at those with this new approach, as opposed to being more prescriptive. So I think we'll have, and again, this will be kind of simple for, if we can simplify the process where we were talking a few presentations ago, where you're able to, click on an interactive map, and then on your property, and then that information pops up. I think it would make it easier. And I know everyone doesn't have access to that, but, the information could be made available here at City Hall.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll have to work through some of those details. I hope that, I know that wasn't a great answer, Susan, I'm sorry, but
It's okay.
it's
Work in
forthcoming.
progress.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I think those standards that you might come up with for that one example that's in the historic district, I think that example is elsewhere in Boulder City. So
Probably, yeah.
it behooves us to get ahead of this, schedule. So
Yeah, no, that's actually a good comment too, because a lot of there's so many buildings that were built at that same time that's outside of the district that were in that style, so yes.
I'm personally a fan of this concept, and it makes a lot of good sense. It's commonsensical. I think it'll work with lots of graphics and descriptions perhaps, or something.
Yep. Yes.
Like that. The other thing I was thinking of, you also might use, I said good versus bad, but I don't think we want to make it negative. So maybe preferred versus not preferred. Or,
Right, yeah.
Some comparisons. But I had a question about the design review process as presented at camp. And I was wondering where the historic preservation officer, official, or professional is part of that process. Are they considered staff?
I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael. Oh, I thought you were,
It's to anybody
Yeah.
who can answer.
Well, it is intended to be staff.
Okay, got it.
Staff is the collective, city staff and our consultant.
Okay. And then I had questions about when you started talking about setbacks. It made me think of projects that we've reviewed where folks have wanted to add an addition or do something to a home that is in the historic district and it's contributing. And Susan, you're going to have to help me remember this, but they were allowed to extend their addition beyond the historic setback because Zone R1 or whatever it's called says, it can be 14, but historically it was only 10 or greater. Maybe it was greater. So there's that. Where does these standards fit in with current zoning regs? Not only with setbacks, but I was thinking about 2 stories. Like none of these homes, for the most part, should be 2 stories, but R1 says, you can have 2 stories. So do we have to change the code for that side of things, or do these standards override current code, current zoning codes, depending on which zone these homes are in, homes or properties, whether it's commercial or residential. So,
Did you have a comment, Michael?
So how it's typically handled is there's a zoning overlay that is created for the district. I'm not sure how, what the city is thinking, but that, with moving forward with design guidelines, which are, as Camp mentioned, are actually standards now. I mean, if they get codified, then they become standards. But I think it's typically a zoning overlay, and within that zoning overlay, you would say, you can't have 2 stories, or here's your setback, or, all of those things get handled within that zoning overlay.
okay. And then, are you potentially looking at taking these standards, these guidelines, what are we calling these? Guidelines, beyond just the actual properties such as residences or commercial or municipal buildings, but what about streets, sidewalks, lighting, parking structures, those kinds of municipal improvements that are popping up?
We have not talked about that yet. No, we haven't discussed that.
Okay.
I'm just working on the buildings right
Put
now.
it on the list, I
Yeah,
guess.
I
Future list. But I think this makes sense, to me, as long as there's some illustrations to
Yeah.
help.
And ignore those sketches. They were done just with drawing over a photograph, so they'll be much nicer. This was
works for
just to
me.
get the idea across.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay.
I tried to hand sketch it at first. It was a disaster.
Okay. Any other comments?
Courtney, I have I like the approach, the style approach, but going through the Northwind report, I started keeping track of the styles, and I came up with 22 different styles that were used in the description of the homes. Is that going to be that way? Because not being an architect, I don't know how many styles there are out there, but I was a little confused that there's so many different styles that were mentioned in the Northwind report when they're describing a house or a building or a home or whatever. Yeah. Is that going to be that way? Are we going to have a list of styles that are 20-some numbers long? Or
I think we narrowed it down to about 17. We grouped a couple of like styles because they're so similar. You might have, a ranch property, and then you might have a Spanish ranch, which the only difference is it's got a tile roof. So there's a couple of them that we lumped together because we didn't want it to get too much, But yeah, I was surprised too. There are a lot of different styles. And a lot of them are just, like we were saying earlier, there's just one. There's one left, some really interesting little individual styles out there.
So the styles, help me with the way the styles will relate to the different areas of the district, okay? So there will be a specific set of styles that will apply to the cherry, birch streets, and so on, and then a specific set that'll apply to the avenues. And I mean, can you have a style that's plunked down in the middle of the avenues that should be in the and how does that contribute to the characteristic of the neighborhood? I mean, when you have I'm just trying to understand these because I don't understand very well all these.
Well, sometimes, you can have 2 styles on a street, but like for instance, the massing is the same, or the setbacks are consistent, or some of these contextual elements are the same regardless of the style. So that will help us. But there's definitely going to, and I think what would be really helpful when we come back, if we can do this, I think a map would be really helpful. And we're going to work really hard to, the next time we come before you, to have a map that's very specific to the context. And so that would be helpful so you can see, you know, how we might break up the different contextual areas. And then we can have a map showing you kind of where these styles are and how they fit together. So I think that would be really helpful. And we can certainly, you know, talk about how we would treat those lone wolves too.
Because it seems to me the purpose of this is to be able to evaluate whether or not a building contributes or doesn't contribute to the historic district. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of these are never going to contribute to the district because they were built outside the period of significance, and even if you tried to, so I'm just curious, I'm hopeful that going through this process will get us to a point where we can begin to apply these guidelines to people who want to try to bring their homes back to something that will be contributing. It won't be original, but it will be contributing. And I'm curious as to how modifications that are made today comply with the period of significance. Okay, so if you've taken a house that was built in the 30s within the period of significance, and it has been changed, and you do whatever you have to do to bring that house back to contributing, you would have had to demolish parts of the house, I presume. You would have had to change parts of the house. You'd had to do construction on the house, all outside the period of significance. And I just don't know how that affects the classification of the house then as being contributing versus non-contributing, because the work that was done to bring it back to contributing was done outside the period of significance, see, and I get confused with this kind of stuff.
Well, you know, a lot of the changes that made the building non-contributing were made outside of the period of significance.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's a pretty narrow period of significance if you think about it. And so, you know, we would have to really get into the one thing that the budget didn't allow in the survey was looking at building permits for every single building to see when a lot of those alterations were made. So we kind of looked at it again with a contextual approach. So, you know, if the screen porch was still there, you know, they may have taken out a window, or they put windows in where they had screens before, partially infilled, you know, all of that stuff was taken into account. But more than likely that screen porch was filled in. You know, you can also see with those 1980s photographs too, that all the changes that have been made since the 80s.
Well, I think particularly in the avenues, if you look at the avenues, there isn't a house. There's only one house on the avenues that resembles what was done in 1931. And I understand that. I mean, if I were living in one of those houses in 1935, the first thing I'd do would be enclose the screen porch, you know, make a bedroom out of it. So there was a lot of that stuff has been done within the period of significance. And that's another thing I've always been curious about. If you've modified the house within the period of significance, doesn't it qualify as being contributing? But I don't know how you know that, because how do you know when the modifications were done? Those kind of questions just, you know, they rattle around in here.
That's what keeps you up at night?
Yes, they do, actually, as a matter of fact.
Well, so, you know, I think, again, we looked at it with a contextual approach. So we looked at, you know, the massing, the types of changes that were made, not necessarily when they were made, and we were pretty flexible on that, because, you know, like you said, a lot of the changes do occur within or shortly after for a lot of reasons. For example, There's a neighborhood in Las Vegas that it was built in the 40s, and after the mid-40s, they all put additions on their rooms because they all, it's the baby boomer,
Baby boom,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And they were small homes, and they had to, add on to them, and those additions were considered significant. So the only way to find that out is to pull building permits on every single one of those properties. And so again, we didn't have the ability to do that, so we looked at it from a very contextual point of view, which I think is a little more forgiving.
Well, and I suspect that many of these alterations were made prior to Boulder City becoming independent. So there were no building permits. There wasn't any planning department.
That's true too, yeah.
So I don't know what you do, but I like your contrast. I'm not being critical here. I'm just trying to understand some of this. I think you're on the right track, and I don't know what else you would do anyway. I'm just hopeful that it moves us down the road and being able to regain some of the lost history in this town and prevent some additional degradation to the district. So anyway, I think you're doing great. I'm happy, but I have these weird questions, Courtney, and then maybe I'll send you an email or something.
Yes, I love weird questions.
So taking off from what you're saying about your confusion, I feel like, the reason that we've come up with the guidelines for contributing structures within the period of significance is to preserve those. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if people are going to ask, well, why do we care about guidelines for infill or new construction? Because it's not going to add to the integrity, the historic integrity of the historic district. It's not going to change the historic district's boundaries or anything like that. So I wonder if there's a need to put some kind of disclaimer, or not disclaimer, but a justification for why we're doing this for the property owners.
Can I throw a thought out to Blair's thing? My thinking on that just is, I'm thinking this is an oversimplification, but for like infill stuff, it's kind of the drive-by. As people are driving down the street, the whole area has an appearance of being historic, even if it's a brand new building, but if it's designed and kind of made to look like it fits in. People going by or walking by, they're not going to necessarily know that that's a new building, but they're going to still have the feel of being in a historic district. That's kind of where my thought is at, and I would think that is what we're kind of trying to achieve in the long game. It's just so that. Yeah, we can't go back in time. We cannot, we can't make something new a second time. But if we can kind of keep it where bring it back to what it looked like, obviously you have to use new materials. But I think that's, in my mind, it's kind of the drive-by effect. And I think if we can achieve that, then it's going to give the perception, if somebody comes to visit Boulder City, they're going to have the perception of that the whole area is historic, even though there's going to be a lot of buildings that aren't contributing or might be, like you say, new infill, but that's kind of where my mind is going at to what hopefully we can accomplish in the long run.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Or another way would be it's not adversely affecting
right
the rest of the buildings.
It's a fabric. There's no loose thread.
I get it. I just was wondering how would we, I don't want to say the word selling, but, how do we, because it's a great opportunity for people who want to build here and they have this misconception that, I can't do anything in the historic district. Well, yeah, you can. Mm-hmm. And so it would be great to help with justifying this is why we're doing this so that, it's not all about saving every window, so.
If I might get a chance to speak.
Of course.
I just want to get back to the overlay and find out, is that something that we will be working on as part of updating our guidelines, or is that a separate issue that we should be initiating and discussing separately as a committee? the overlay, you know, with regard to the 2 stories, is that part of our work? You know, for the guidelines, will that,
Like
you know, when is the
zoning,
appropriate
you mean?
time to
Zoning?
initiate that?
So, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is the regulations and the adoption of the design guidelines and whether that would be enough to adhere to those standards or whether it necessitates an additional zoning overlay. We'll verify that. But what you're going to be working on is the elements of each of the different design guidelines. That's what, after, I guess, all the questions are done, I want to kind of just clarify before we move forward.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
I've got a whole list.
So
Did you
I-
want to bring it up now before Michael? Okay, okay.
I do have one question, and I'm wondering if this is where you're going with this, and that is, what are we supposed to be doing to help with this process? And if that's something you're going to talk about,
Yes.
great, okay.
So, next steps. We want to make sure that Ms. Mooney is going in the right direction. And that's why she presented this information tonight to ensure buy-in from the committee so that she can begin working on specific design guidelines for the different zones and the different architectural standards. And so what I wanted to reiterate and just make sure that the committee is on the same page with, you've got contributing properties. And with respect to the contributing properties, the focus is the architectural standards of those properties, how they were built, and with reviewing those properties, ensuring that changes do not take it from a contributing to a non-contributing. And so what Ms. Mooney is going to be working on is the very specifics as it relates to the roughly 17 different architectural standards, styles. So that's with the contributing. Then you have everything else, which is the non-contributing properties built within the period of significance. And so we would apply the design within context approach to those. Certainly, if there are opportunities with some of those to bring them back to contributing through the residential grant, that's that opportunity. And so it's either something that can be brought back to contributing or has been so modified that it's just never going to be. And so any changes to those buildings have to meet the contextual approach guidelines. Then you have properties that were built outside the period of significance within the district. They would also have to adhere to the contextual approach guidelines for any modifications. And then you have new construction. And so with the last 3 that I just described, and I think it's been reiterated by the committee in a couple different ways, changes to those properties will do no harm to the overall context of the neighborhood and the historic district. If there's an opportunity with some of those properties to bring them back to contributing, then certainly that's what we'll focus on, but primarily it's to do no harm with modifications to those properties.
I just have one question. So does that just come up when they come to Community Development Department? That's when it's addressed, or will they be?
So the certificate of appropriateness that would be tied to the updated ordinance, that would be required, and the path for review would be dependent upon the design review guidelines that the committee develops and that would go to the city council for approval.
Okay.
So,
A quick question, Michael. If I understand this right, the only properties that would come, an application for a permit to modify a property would only come before the commission if it were a contributing property. So if it's a non-contributing property, whether it was built within or without or whatever, it's a non-contributing property, the commission would never see that. Because
No,
it would be handled through staff, which would be the historic preservation officer or whatever the title is. Is that correct?
That's not correct, because what the design guidelines are doing is determining what is looked at with respect to potential changes. What you're referring to is what we've described as the decision matrix that will be tied to the ordinance.
Right.
And so it will determine the path of review, who reviews under the different types of permits being proposed. So this focuses on how the changes impact or don't impact the historic district. That, the decision matrix, will determine the review process.
But I'm still, because this is a historic preservation committee, or commission, hopefully it will be a commission. What authority do we have to make a judgment on a property that is not historic, okay? Because it's not historic and nothing, well, unless they're gonna bring it back to contributing, okay? But I don't understand why, if someone comes before this committee and they live in a house that is non-contributing and they want to put an addition on the side, it's in the historic, it has to be in the historic district, right, but it's a non-contributing property.
But they still have to follow the guidelines still.
So
because
we
that's
can tell
part
them,
of
well,
it.
no, you can't do that.
Right, because that's part of the guidelines, right, Michael?
The decision matrix will determine who reviews it, whether it's the commission or the staff. But the design guidelines will influence all changes within the district. It's just you're going to have more specific standards for contributing properties,
Yeah.
but it's very conceptual, this context approach to non-contributing properties.
As long as they maintain the mass and the setbacks and all of that, they can probably do, so there's this conceptual thing.
Right. Basically, what you're recognizing is they don't contribute. But do the changes, again, do harm to the overall contextual neighborhood and the district itself?
Okay.
And as long as it can meet those
Right.
broad
criteria.
context approaches, then they move forward with those improvements.
Yeah, so you're saying basically that, and this is what I was questions kind of asked was, all right, so if a non-contributing home comes in front of the panel, commission, committee, whichever it ends up being, if that design change in that home detracts from the overall neighborhood, it would come to that commission or committee for our opinion. Basically that, no, we really don't want to see that happen because now you're detracting from the whole neighborhood. Not just, we know you're non-contributing, your addition is non-contributing, but it's deteriorating the rest of the neighborhood. So that would still come to the commission or committee, whatever we end up being in as time goes on. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that would be a fair statement. If they want to pursue something that doesn't meet the design guidelines, yes.
But they go through staff with all the guidelines, so they're gonna get stopped at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. Okay, any other comments, or?
So I guess, are we on the right path?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the map, Courtney, the map that you come up with is gonna help a lot to help us understand.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do have a question. Do you need our help more than just once a month?
I'm not sure. I need to take a little time to think about the next steps. And so I will discuss it with Michael when I've had a second. This month has been a little bit of a flurry, so I apologize.
So ideally, depending on workload, what we'd bring back to you would be an example of one of the design guidelines, so that you could provide further input. And if, we're continuing on the right path, then that gives Ms. Mooney the direction she needs to be working on the different design guidelines.
Yeah, I think every step forward we make, keeps us on that path. As long as we keep going forward, a little here, a little there, as long as we keep
Yeah.
going that direction, we're good. I mean, there's been plenty of input, over the months and stuff, and Ms. Mooney comes here and listens and presents. I mean, we got good guidance from you and Susan. I think, we're definitely going in the right direction.
Yep. Thank you, Courtney.
You're
Thank you for your
welcome.
time.
Thank you for your comments. Really helpful.
Okay, all right, then we're gonna go ahead and move on then to number 3. For possible action, update on implementation of the committee's goals and priorities.
So Chairwoman Graham, as we do every month, you have the matrix in front of you. Highlighted in bold indicates new items, and if you did not see last night's city council meeting, city council did approve directing staff to move forward with the text amendment for the historic preservation ordinance.
Oh, good, that's good news. Yeah. All
So
right,
any
very good.
questions?
All right,
Is there a timeline on that?
We're looking at the
Like
planning
tomorrow?
commission, yes. We're looking at the planning commission's schedule. We do have several items. Just to reiterate, next steps, any amendment to Title 11 of the city code requires review by the planning commission. And so we would be scheduling a public hearing before the planning commission. We'd be notifying all the property owners within the historic district of that meeting. They would hold a public hearing. They would make a recommendation back to the city council. Then that recommendation goes back to the city council. And as with any ordinance, which is required to amend the city code, there is a bill introduction before the city council. No action is taken. They just introduce the bill. And then at the next available city council meeting, the city council would deliberate on the bill and either approve or disapprove that.
and has that been scheduled yet, or,
No, we're
okay,
checking the schedule with the planning commission and availability, so in the next couple of months.
okay, good. Well, we're moving right along. Does anybody have any comments about the matrix? Okay, I did have one comment, and it is on our schedule. Here it is. It's actually in blue, which is a low priority. However, maybe just thinking ahead. Develop a historic preservation easement program overseen by the HPC. So at camp, they discuss the easement program. Can you give us a little information on that? Or?
Basically, that would be the ability to provide easements that would protect properties within the community. And so that's certainly one of the recommendations from the Historic Preservation Plan. Obviously, each of these different assignments, tasks is dependent upon priority and resource availability.
Okay.
So certainly,
Yeah, I just
where
thought it
our,
was-
where our focus is right now, particularly with Northwind, is with the design review guidelines. That's where the primary focus is.
Right.
Once we accomplish that, then we can look at some of the other goals here and get direction from the committee on where those priorities should be.
Okay.
By the way, Michael, where are we on developing this matrix? The matrix that decides who gets to do what? I mean, I know there's that one from, was it St. Louis that was used as an example? But who is working on that, if anyone is? Is anyone doing, because that matrix seems to me to be a pretty important part of the whole process. I mean, that's
the goal setting.
That was just an example that was in the historic preservation plan. And I am talking to the city attorney about next steps on how we would develop that. And we believe it would need to be codified with the code. And so that would be something that would be a part of the code update.
So who all is going to be involved in establishing this matrix or making the decisions about who goes where?
Well,
Is that
we all
the
do.
city attorney? Is that?
No, it would ultimately be the city council because it would be part of the ordinance
Okay,
update.
so it'd be a council thing, not, yeah, all right.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point that out, that we did receive some training on the historic easement program. So, we're looking at the future.
I wonder if, I mean, it's not really an easement, it's a covenant, but the LADWP building has I don't know what to call it, a covenant or an easement, because it received historic preservation funds back in the day. And so for 20 years, they can't do anything without first making sure that they get approval from the SHPO. And then the hotel has one as well.
Really?
I don't think
didn't
it's
know
it's not called an easement though, but it would be handy to have those available
We could,
somewhere
I think that
online.
might be connected to the grant monies. That
Exactly.
they received the same
Yep.
same grant monies we've applied for the water filtration plant, I believe.
Right.
I don't know how long the covenant is, but it's long.
It depends on the amount received, determines the term of the protection. So why don't we just, we'll get the current covenants related to LA Department of Water and Power and share that with the committee.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, good. Okay, any other comments about the matrix, the current one that we're working on? And once again, I want to thank staff for their hard work and completing all of our recommendations, and I appreciate it very much. And it's always a joy to work with both of you. You're always so helpful, and I want you to know we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll move on then. Number 4, for possible action, follow-up discussion regarding activities for Historic Preservation Day and award for 2022.
Before we get started on that heavy discussion here, I just want a little shout out to both Michael and Susan for all their behind-the-scenes work for the Historic Preservation Day. A lot of effort went behind it, and Michael was also there helping big time on the day and stuff like that. But we all know, if you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that goes on prior to an event like that. I know, so the people that were working on that, like I say, behind the scenes, big thank you.
Yes.
Well, and Susan kept all of us very organized, and so I want to give a shout out to her for all of her hard work. Lisa LaPlante did all of the promotion of the Historic Preservation Day, and so that got the word out, and so,
Yeah.
There's stuff that, a lot of stuff doesn't get seen, being done, but there's a lot that has to be done. So sometimes people forget that, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that you weren't forgotten.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, does anybody have any comments about our great day that we had together for historic preservation?
I would like to just say that the tour up at the filtration plant was a big success. and a lot of new people came along that hadn't seen it before, and we were able to describe to them how the plant operated. It was a really nice day up there, so that went really well.
Good.
I didn't get a head count, though. I wish I had a thought to ask the guys how many people, but I would think probably same as usual, about 100 or so.
That's quite a few, actually, 100, yeah.
I do have a comment about the railroad, because the railroad event was very poorly attended. And I think in part it was their own fault, because they didn't have, according to them, they didn't have the staff to man a table at the introductory part. So I think part of the problem was self-inflicted, but the other thing that occurs to me is that railroad event comes at the end of the day, okay? And it's a hot day, and people have been, first of all, they haven't had lunch because of the events that occur. And I'm throwing this out as not as something that maybe next year we can discuss. I'm wondering if we can move the railroad event up, and I haven't talked to the railroad people, so up earlier in the day so that people can come from the railroad to all of the other events that are going to go on up here, okay? And maybe that would, because the railroad was such an important part of the history of Boulder City that it's kind of a shame that it just doesn't get its due. But like I said, I think part of that's self-inflicted because they have not really gone out of their way to cooperate with the Historic Preservation Day. But that's something I would like to discuss in the future, is maybe if we rearrange the schedule a little bit and talk to them and got them on board, that there would be a little better attendance down there for some, because it really was pretty dismal. In fact, if the kids hadn't been there, I don't know whether there wouldn't have been half a dozen people, I don't think. And it really was interesting. I mean, that really is a vital part of the history of Boulder City.
I think it's going to help when we get the new visitor center. There'll be kind of like a place that we can gather together. Right now, it's an outdoor
Right, yeah,
museum.
exactly, yeah.
So everything is outdoors, you know. But the cars that they had on display, it's the first time I've ever been out there and to actually see it. And the cars they had on display, they have some really interesting
Oh, yeah, they do,
cars
yeah.
in the collection. So I think people would really enjoy seeing those more. So, yeah, we could talk about that, and we'll see how we could make it more viable for the community to get involved. So that'll be good, because we want to keep, that's definitely a focal point for Boulder City, bringing in tourism, and we need to highlight it as much as we can, you know. So, okay.
Make a suggestion. We don't have to wait till Historic Preservation Day to work with the Railroad Museum. I mean, we could perhaps have some other off-season, Historic Preservation Month event. I don't know, something to
Okay,
consider.
something to think about. Okay,
Jump back in?
go ahead.
Just wanted to mention too that the panel discussion was filmed by
Yeah.
Nikki Collins, and she's going to be sharing it with, I don't know if she already has or not, but she will be sharing the video with the city, and she's sharing it with, she'll be sharing it around on Facebook, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there is a video.
Yeah, there were people that missed Preservation Day, so then they can see that video in full at any point. I don't know if it's something you want to put on the website, or is that probably not? I don't know.
We'll
Make it
certainly
available?
discuss with the communications manager.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. Maybe we can have it put on the website if it's okay with them. Okay. So how were the other events? The workshops that I went to, I was very pleased. When we planned those small workshops, being downtown in the historic area, it's kind of like to highlight what we actually do historically in Boulder City, because some of the, to me, some of the successes of historic preservation has been taking some of these buildings that were almost demolished, number one, and number two, you know, they've turned into very viable businesses, and we need to celebrate their success. So I was thinking when we planned those workshops downtown, there might only be maybe 20 or so, but we actually had pretty good attendance. They were pretty full, I would guess around 30 at all the workshops. And the material that they had was very interesting. All of the presentations, if you listen carefully, you learn a lot. And there were books available, and having the lemonade and cookies was a lot of fun there at the lobby. And so I think overall, I think we really had a good time, you know. So I'm thinking in the future of other possibilities of how we can maybe reach out to some more business owners downtown. You know, now the only thing I don't know about is how the lunches. Do you know anything about how that went, like with the businesses?
I have no luck.
None. Nobody even took us up on one?
I did talk to, I'm not going to name any names, but I did talk to 4 different restaurants in
yeah.
town, and did provide them with, not all of them, with a copy of the cookbook,
Yeah.
the historic cookbook, for ideas, but they seemed very enthusiastic, and I just think maybe
It needs to be
they had a lot
cultivated.
going on, and so maybe for next year, and who knows, maybe those items will show up sooner, because they'd be fun items to have on a menu in town, a
Yeah,
historic
yeah.
item.
Well, that's something too that I think we should keep pursuing. I think these things sometimes take time. It takes time to percolate some ideas and making it come to fruition. So we'll just keep tweaking it and working on it. And I think overall, I've heard only positive comments about everything. So I think it went very well, and I want to thank all of the committee. I put Glenn in charge of the building at the LA Water and Power Building because I knew I couldn't be there, you know. So I never worried one bit. He had the whole thing under control and was able to manage all of our guests and visitors. And of course, Blair was there to answer any hard questions. And the panel, when I went to the panel, I didn't get to see the whole thing. So I'm glad that Ray videotaped it.
Oh, I didn't, it wasn't me.
Oh, well, I mean, Nikki, but Nikki did, yeah. But I'm glad it got videotaped because then we can go back and really look at what the discussion was. So I didn't really get to see the whole discussion, so I'm kind of looking forward to, you know, seeing that. So I think we did a marvelous job, and I want to thank all the committee. I mean, everybody did their homework. Everybody worked 100%. And as Glenn said, the staff, I mean, everything you guys do is so professional. I mean, it's so beautifully done and executed.
All the legwork.
Yes, and like I said, Michael is such a help. He was right there with us with ice water and made sure everybody got their goodies, you know, to deliver to the different venues. So thank you, Michael, for your support of the program. So I think go ahead, Glenn.
I got to sit in the water department building all day.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to just, you know, kind of the vibe that coming through there. You know, a lot of people came in. Everybody's friendly. You know, everybody's enjoying the day. Answered a few questions. You know, different things. Kind of pointed out some different things to the people that came in. So there was an interest of the people that were there. It wasn't a huge crowd, you know, but it's steady throughout the day. You know, I'm talking about, you know, prior to the panel and everything, just
Getting their
people.
maps and,
Yeah, I mean, they're asking some questions, and was able to give them a little bit of information, you know, kind of try to remind them, you know, point out, well, they got these other things going on, because, you know, a lot of people came in and just kind of, what's going on?
yeah.
So I was able to kind of, well, hey, if you've never been to, go check out the water filtration plant, you know. If you've not been to the hotel, they've got lemonade and cookies at the hotel, you know, just kind of get to do a little point here, point there, a little, traffic directions, stuff like that. And I think it was good. I mean, they didn't have to do a lot of it, but, there were some people didn't really know what was going on, but was able to point them in the right direction, and they seemed to be enthused about the whole event. So, and again, everybody worked hard and did their part. Again, Michael and Susan and, probably other people in the background too, but, I think it was a successful day. The donuts were a big hit,
Did we ever
good
eat up all
donuts.
the donuts?
Well, there was 2 boxes that were left over and stuff like that, and Emergency Aid was having a food drive that day. So I took them down the hall and say, hey, here's some donuts for your volunteers and stuff, so.
Good,
So they were, hopefully they were put to good use,
yeah,
so.
okay.
But otherwise, I think, well, I had to test a couple of them, make sure that they're good for our people coming in. And the coffee was good, I don't think anybody ever got to the tea. I don't think anybody figured out how to do the tea thing, but that's all right. Coffee was there, donuts were there, people were there. It was an overall nice event. So,
Yeah,
well done to everybody.
yeah.
I forgot to say a big thank you to Tara Leon at the company store.
Yes,
And all day probably before Friday too, but all day Friday, I know she was decorating the store and the window cases at the store. And she had the old newspaper blown up onto giant big sheets. And that back room where the presentation took place, she spent a lot of time getting that ready and comfortable
yes,
for everyone. And that was also videotaped as well, so.
yes, yeah, I
we
haven't
have
had
a
a
video
chance
of
to look at that either.
on
Yeah,
YouTube too.
yeah,
So thanks to Tara.
Well,
Yes.
give a shout out to the museum also. Roger did a beautiful job of giving the history of the museum. And Tiani did a review of her book, and I think it was well received. People seemed to enjoy it. So yeah, all of those people outside of the committee did a great job. So
yes, to emphasize what Ray said too, Dr. Michael Green's lecture was just excellent. He gave an overview, and he did include the railroad in his lecture, which was quite interesting. I'd like to see a copy of that if he has that copied, so I could reread it. But he mentioned that the railroad is really an important part of the overall history of Boulder City, and so we need to keep that in mind. And the students that he brought with him from UNLV, one was working on her master's, and the other one was working on her PhD thesis, and they actually had items from the Walker Box Ranch, which was amazing to see these things. They had Clara Bowes, she was a Hollywood actress. They had her makeup kit, and it was like in perfect condition. It was just amazing. And so that was exciting to see that and to see the progress they're making on the Walker Box Ranch. And I read an article just recently in the Boulder City Review about the Spirit Mountain Project, and the person that was talking in the article really, she was a high school teacher for a while in Boulder City, and she really feels that this Spirit Mountain Project might be kind of like a gateway for more tourism, and it would be kind of like more of an emphasis too for all of the tourism of Boulder City, Hoover Dam, and the Spirit Mountain Project, which would include the Walker Box Ranch. So that was an interesting thought, that it would be, what, did I say it wrong? Walking box, I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, so it's kind of like interesting to see it all coming together, because this is such a large piece of property here surrounding Boulder City and everything. So I see that as a good thing in the future. All right, so we'll, I think we mentioned that maybe we want to start planning. I think we need a little vacation, but maybe in October we can start planning. And I'm planning to talk to a few people. Maybe we could, I don't know with the rules, if we would talk with Mr. McMahon at the railroad, a group of us, or how that would go.
Yeah, that's planning for the event, unfortunately, with more than one of you,
Yeah.
would require an ad hoc committee, and so I think it's
Yeah.
just better to just.
One-on-one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I would encourage us all to do is maybe just make an appointment with anybody that we're working with, and just talk to them about the future and some of our ideas, and we'll all kind of just keep working on it. And then in October, we'll take a more formal approach and get our ideas together. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
I think what we need to do eventually is talk about the award,
Okay?
in that we didn't get many, if any,
Oh,
submissions.
yeah.
So I think we might need to come up with some ideas of how to promote it better or revise it to get more, enthusiasm about it. I don't know. Something to
Yeah.
think about.
Maybe before October, maybe in August, maybe we could put it on the agenda and maybe discuss it a little bit. Would that be good, maybe?
Well, what month do you want to start talking about things? October
Well,
or?
I think October. So do you think that's enough time?
Well, I just wasn't sure, when do we normally start working on this? Is it October?
You start, yeah, normally, and I mentioned in the report, you started October last year.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just, in October then, we'll just start discussing ways that we could improve. Okay. All right, very good.
One last thing, in regards to the awards. I had a nice chat with Susan McIntyre last week, and she wanted me to express her appreciation for the nomination and the election to the committee, and she apologized for not being able to make it in person, but she had personal reasons. So she did thank us all for the, so I told her I would pass that on to everybody.
Yeah, that was kind of exciting, that 421 Birch was owned by Susan McIntyre, who was on the committee. It's almost like coming full circle. I just think that was just amazing that Ray picked that out. We didn't know one
Yeah, you
bit
did
about
good,
it.
Ray, yeah,
And
yeah.
so
She
that
was, by the
really-
way, she was on the first Historic Preservation Committee.
Right, yeah, yeah. Okay, good.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to move on then to number 4, for possible action, follow-up discussion regarding activities for Historic Preservation Day and Award. We just did that, I'm sorry, I didn't have it checked off. For possible action, discussion update on the status of properties in the historic district or other potentially eligible properties.
Looks to me like there wasn't much going on.
I do have a question about the lighting, the festive lighting. Is that, what's going on with that? The
Do
festoon.
you,
the
you're referring to
festoon. I always-
bistro lighting?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But somebody else calls it festoon lighting.
Okay. When this was presented to the city council, they have asked for input by the Historic Preservation Committee, and so we're coordinating with Public Works to bring them to present that to the committee.
So speaking of lighting, have a look on the City Hall entrance. They replaced those horrible lights with some better appropriate light fixtures. They're still pretty bright, but at least they're a little bit more historically accurate. So thank you to whomever in the city made that change. Thank you.
That would be Public Works.
Okay, good. All right, we'll have to take a look at that more carefully. Thank you, Blair.
Actually, before we go though, because Michael, as I recall, from watching the council meeting, there was a motion made, I believe it was made by James Howard Adams, that the city was going to come up with, I'll use the term guidelines, I'm not sure that was correct, for both the parks and the lighting. And once those guidelines, and I don't know that's the correct term, were developed, then it would come back to the committee for review. Is that what that motion was?
So you're talking about two different things.
There were two different
Right.
things, right. There was the statue in the park, and then the lighting, the bistro lighting.
Yeah. So with the bistro lighting, there's no guidelines. It's just to present what Public Works is proposing for extension of the bistro lighting and to get feedback from the committee on that.
Okay.
But you're correct as it relates to statues within parks, staff is developing guidelines for that.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, moving on to number 6, for possible action, committee discussion regarding potential agenda items for upcoming Historic Preservation Committee meetings. Okay, I think we have our plate pretty full right now. All right. Okay, so,
Well, just to reiterate, I
Yeah.
will coordinate with Ms. Mooney and see if we can come back with a presentation next month.
okay, all right, that'll be good. Thank you so much.
Real quick, and I had requested an agenda item. I believe we settled on June. I just wanted to remind you guys about that. Susan, you got that right?
For promotion.
Yeah,
correct.
thanks.
Oh, and I guess this would also be along those same lines. So similar to last year, there won't be a meeting in July. After the first city council meeting in July, they're going to finalize the renovations of this room, so it's going to require Public Works to have 3 to 4 weeks to do that work, so you'll get July off.
Okay,
That's firm, Michael, that no meeting in July?
Correct, no meeting in July.
okay.
I had a question about the NAPC Saturday, the camp, which was excellent, by the way. I really enjoyed that, and thank you for inviting the Historic Preservation Committee, the Planning Commission, and City Council folks. But they mentioned that there were some handouts, or their presentations would be made available.
An email went out to all the participants about 2 hours ago.
Oh, okay, good. Well, will it go to people who didn't attend?
It only to the attendees, but we can certainly forward it
Okay.
to those.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, moving on to public comment. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak at the discretion of the chair. Comments made during the public comment period of the agenda may be on any subject. All remarks shall be addressed to the Historic Preservation Committee as a whole, not to any individual member of the Historic Preservation Committee, of the audience, or of the city staff. No person other than members of the Historic Preservation Committee and the person who has the floor shall be permitted to enter into any discussion, either directly or through a member of the Historic Preservation Committee, without the permission of the chair or presiding officer. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item. So, if you would like to call in, the number is 702-589-9629. Okay, hearing no public comments, then this meeting is adjourned.